Right. Hey, everyone, I'm Klloo. So, time to start diving into the high seas heroes. Now, sure, there's not a whole lot to go off just yet, but it is definitely fleshed out enough to start thinking about what exactly is going on and what these heroes want to do. Gravy Bones aside, right, he still needs a little bit more love, Watery Graves, some allies, for us to really understand what Necromancer is packing. But Puffin, 5 intellect item mech, seems good enough to speculate on. And then, of course, our Marlynn Treasure Hunter, my personal favorite for the set so far until we see some cards that say otherwise, is just looking just big harpoon arrows, right? And a whole bunch of gold generation. So I thought we'd start with her and see what exactly we can pull off. Now, I do want to highlight, right? High seas compared to heavy hitters. Heavy hitters, while having gold focus, was not to the level that we're seeing with high seas, right? It had the wager, agility, might, the other tokens thrown in there as well, clash, and all these sort of mechanics that weren't as clear-cut as simply just presenting decent damage and forcing your opponent to block, otherwise they reward you with a gold token. And in that same sense, unlike wager, if they do block you out, they don't get any other benefit, right? They don't get the tokens that you were wagering. So altogether, that does straight away make me think that High Seas is just a significantly better gold set, that Pirate will be functionally a lot better than those gold heroes. So, starting off with Marlynn, right? When we first looked into her, we hypothesized Tri-Shot. Now, Tri-Shot, obviously, won't do anything. So Red Spine Manta and our Hammerhead Harpoon Cannon both have action, not once per turn action, meaning that the only requirement here is the resource cost and of course tapping. So if there is some way to untap, you can technically just reuse either of these bows over and over again, meaning that Tri-Shot is pretty much off the table, but 3 of a kind is not. No, 3 of a kind just keeps getting better, it seems, because now we have a big resource spender by way of Hammerhead Harpoon Cannon. So 3 of a kind, draw 3 cards. Until the end of turn, you may only play cards from your arsenal, right? So that is a big hiccup, right? Usually the cards that you draw kind of go to waste in Azalea or Riptide, but now with Marlynn, there's definitely some outs that just make it a lot better. So, straight away, we have our Hammerhead Harpoon Cannon. A nice big pump 4 for 4. So the 3 cards you draw, find an arrow, load it, and then pump with Hammerhead Harpoon Cannon. And that's a nice easy turn to follow up whatever else you've started with. Then we also just have the sense of being able to load through other means. So we have a whole heap of gold generation, and I expect us to get a whole lot more. But, for instance, we could take the buff from Hammerhead Harpoon Cannon, stick it on a Bolton shot, right? So now that's somewhere between a 6 and an 8. Presenting go again, and on hit reload to then follow up with another arrow, right, off of 3 of a kind. So this card is definitely going to be quite the tool piece for Marlynn. And then we have on board Long Draw Half Glove. If you do take it, there's another easy way to spend the cards if you've already used your Hammerhead Harpoon Cannon. But altogether, just the fact that you have this big resource spender means that those 3 cards from 3 of a kind won't go to waste, and you still have plenty of outs to continue loading arrows if you do go for some sort of string of arrows rather than just a nice big harpoon. Now, Marlynn's engine. So, we take our gold token and we convert it to a Goldfin Harpoon. We can then use that Goldfin Harpoon in many different ways, right? You cannot pitch it, but it is a yellow card, and you can, of course, discard it or bottom it if you have some sort of cycle. So we are seeing printed Big Game Trophy Shot, which is a beautiful card. Allows us to draw and then discard a card, along with giving a +4 and an on-hit effect if our attack is going to be a harpoon. So what we can do, obviously, is convert our gold to our Goldfin Harpoon, and then use it as discard fodder for our Big Game Trophy Shot. Now, obviously, if Art of War was still in class constructed, it would do numbers in Marlynn, but Big Game Trophy Shot is still going to be quite nice, not to mention that we do have other outs as well. So, for instance, in Lion Strike, you generate a Goldfin Harpoon, and in Lion Strike is now an easy 0-5 go again. 0-5 draw a card, load a card. Or even just a 0-7 to finish using that card you've generated off of your gold. We also have cards like Sift, right, which become a little bit better. I don't know if it's necessarily playable. It is a 3-block, it is blue, so you can take it for your big things. And then essentially all it is converting that gold and that Goldfin Harpoon to cycle, which then basically just ups the consistency of your deck, right? You don't net any positive cards because you have to play Sift, but the fact that you can just cycle these 2 cards, in a sense, into something else might be a little bit worth it, right? And then even if we don't have a payoff for our Goldfin Harpoon, we have the fact that we can just pop gold by itself. We don't have to use it in conjunction with Marlynn's ability. We could use a blue, float a resource. So that's now gaining a resource to load an arrow and draw. right? We could use yellow, neutral, but we still get to load an arrow. Or we could even just go minus, right? And that's equivalent to a normal bow, right? We spent one resource, essentially, to load an arrow. We've redrawn a card and potentially found an arrow that we want to load. So overall, what this just means to me is Marlynn's consistency to find the game pieces that you really want on the turns you want is going to be pretty high, right? Again, we have lots of outs to cycle, sift, and find, right? Or even just use the goldfin harpoons that we generate if we are a bit heavy on, say, the buff side and not necessarily finding an arrow to use, right? A goldfin harpoon being a 4 for 6, it's not great, but it's definitely not horrible, especially if we then throw in some other things to really pump it. So that flexibility is really standing out to me in terms of how we can utilize Marlynn to her full ability. Then we have the other cards in support of this sort of mechanism. So for instance, we have the big pirate card revealed, Conqueror of the High Seas, a nice 4 for 8, go again if you've pitched 2 blues. That is, yeah, pretty massive to then go into, say, a 2 for 6 arrow that still pressures something else. So this is, again, something your opponent wants to deny, because A, it destroys your arsenal, B, it creates you a gold token if it does so, to then, again, represent a 2 for 6 arrow that does something similar. Makes them discard and gets you a gold, right? So Conqueror of the High Seas leading into these big things is just back-to-back a big turn. Not to mention we have other cards, and basically altogether Go Again seems like it's going to be quite ample for Pirates. We don't necessarily know how Gold Kiss Rum is going to be generated, but giving up Marlynn's ability for a turn, her ability to create a Goldfin Harpoon, to give anything Go Again, I think is definitely pretty nice. And then Flying High just as a nice connector. Think of this with Goldfin Harpoon, if we were to take the yellow, this would make Goldfin Harpoon basically just a 0 for 3 with Go Again, so nice average stat lines when we find Flying High yellow, right? So I think that's fair enough. Then Gold Baited Hook as our gold support, so giving our pirate cards another chance to generate us a gold token, and basically stacking up a whole bunch of gold tokens to, again, increase the consistency of Marlynn to be able to reload arrows. Seems like a really good game plan. Not to mention she's built around basically withstanding fatigue, right? We generate those Goldfin Harpoons, we use them through our other means, right? In line strike, sift, putting them to the bottom of our deck, right? Although we can't pitch it, there are ways to get it in our deck to then line it up with other buffs that we've pitched away and basically still have a solid curve near the end of the game through our Goldfin Harpoon, through our nice big buff stick on board, through our Harpoon Cannon. So in conjunction with something like Toxicity, Release the Tension, just these nice pitchable buffs that we can use late game is definitely going to be nice. Then, of course, we have just the basis of taking big stuff now. So Rouse the Ancients is definitely, I think, on the table. So getting this to 13 means you most likely need a 6 and a 7. So there are plenty of generic 7s. I doubt we will see a base 7 arrow. I think we'll get some 2 for 6s, but we won't see anything bridge into the 3. Although, again, we do have the Conqueror of the High Seas as one of those 7s. So Rouse the Ancients just being a nice blue pitchable, that's on the times we find that 7 and 6. To be able to throw out as a go again into then one of our 2 for 6 arrows is definitely nice, right? That's already 3 things we can take along with Conqueror of the High Seas. So 6 different turns where we could have that possible 7, 8 into a 6, right? That is definitely nice. Then we have other big attacks that still work with Marlynn's game plan. So the Weakest Link, forcing your opponent to discard and then you draw, allows you to load, right, and prep that arsenal slot for your end phase to then be loaded up with something else thanks to New Horizon. We have Wage Gold, again, just as a nice 3 for 7 to go along with Rouse the Ancients. That will help us to try and generate gold. Not to mention just the big buffs, right? We now are getting more 2 for 6 arrows, right? There was just Battering Bolt. We're now at least up to 9, meaning that Pummel is definitely on the table. So Pummel, in conjunction with our arrows, our harpoons, is definitely going to do nice. Slogarithm, I don't know, but just the thought of having a, what would it be? It would be a plus 10 for 7, right, onto something would be nice. You'd need the arrow load into your arsenal first, then Slogarithm in hand and 3 pitchables, right? 2 for the arrow, 4 for the harpoon cannon, and then 3 for the Slogarithm. Yeah, you need 5 full cards to get that done, or gold to cheat out resources / draw enough. So yeah, a nice big 16. I think I'd be happy with that as a turn, right? And again, if your opponent can't fully block it out, you risk discard. So either way, it's probably going to empty their hand and just buy you that turn with a little bit of chip damage. Not to mention, we have our Go Again support. So cards like Lead the Charge, now a lot more feasible since we have that 2 or greater. We can take the blue variant so it's still pitchable, and then use in conjunction with our arrows or some of these other big cards. Now, Dreadball is a interesting thought, right? Just taking it for the protection it offers. So our harpoons not being able to be blocked with defense reactions from hand is definitely an interesting thought. I don't think it's really worth it over just the big buff button, right? That is our harpoon cannon, but it's still an interesting thought. It's not as lucrative to me, right? Because you don't have the dominate as Azalea, so you're not forcing your opponent to block with something that you don't want to block with and denying them the defense reaction. It's just there to simply deny defense reaction, which, again, the arrows might be big enough where that is definitely warranted. I don't know if they get there without taking the Harpoon Cannon, but it's still something to consider. Kind of like the weakest link, right? If it hits, we get to see our opponent's hand. Now, in terms of Go Fish, if we have activated our cannon this turn, this means we also get to reveal our opponent's hand. Seduce Secrets, another card that I do think is functional in Marlynn, being able to, again, be played from the arsenal, get that card draw and reload something, means that we have a lot of decent ways to read our opponent's hand, which is definitely impactful in a strategic game like Flesh and Blood. So altogether, Big Marlynn is definitely lining up really nice despite us not seeing the complete lineup of cards, right? We still don't have the nice string of rare Pirate Ranger cards that hopefully also have Go Fish, right? And our Harpoons. Even if we just saw one more Majestic Harpoon and it was just a set of 9, I think that's definitely enough to get her off the ground for big golden arrows. Now, the other thought to take is if there is enough ways to generate gold, you can definitely go for the string of arrows, right? Instead, being able to draw and load and just fire them back to back. Although the Go Again proc is a little light, right? We only have our Harpoon Cannon buff a single arrow for the turn, unless again there are ways to untap. But altogether, I do think she is shaping up to be quite strong right out the gate. What do you think? Hope you enjoyed. See ya.